Merry Christmas.
The snow fell softly over the bustling city streets, blanketing everything in a pristine layer of white. The bright twinkling of Christmas lights reflected off the snow, giving the entire scene an ethereal glow. It was the kind of evening where everything felt peaceful, where the magic of the holidays was palpable in the air. Inside the Parr household, the warmth of the Christmas spirit was alive and well. The scent of cookies baking in the oven filled the air, and the flicker of the fireplace cast a soft glow over the living room. Violet and Dash were busy decorating the tree, while Helen Parr, Elastigirl, hummed a Christmas carol as she adjusted the ornaments. Little Jack Jack sat in his high chair, giggling as he played with a strand of tinsel. Bob Parr, better known as Mr. Incredible, was in the kitchen, wrapping presents with far more difficulty than he cared to admit. His massive hands fumbled with the delicate ribbon and wrapping paper, and despite his best efforts, he had somehow managed to entangle himself in a mess of tape. "Dad, you need help," Violet said with a smirk, glancing over at her father as he struggled to free himself from the tangle of gift wrap. Bob grinned sheepishly. "It's under control. Just a minor setback." Helen chuckled from across the room. "Why don't you leave the wrapping to me, Bob? You handle the heavy lifting. I'll take care of the details." The family laughed, the warmth of the holiday filling the room. For the first time in what felt like ages, there was no looming threat, no urgent call for heroism. It was just them, a family, ready to enjoy a quiet Christmas together. But the peaceful moment was shattered by the sudden ring of the doorbell. Everyone paused, exchanging a curious look. It was late, and they weren't expecting any visitors. Bob stood up, his large frame filling the doorway as he made his way to the front door. As soon as he opened it, the familiar figure of Lucius Best, or Frozone, stood there, looking unusually tense. Snowflakes clung to his coat, and his breath formed visible clouds in the cold night air. But it wasn't the weather that had Lucius looking worried. It was something far worse. "Bob," Lucius said, his voice low and urgent. "We've got a problem." Bob furrowed his brow. "What's going on, Lucius? It's Christmas Eve. Can't it wait?" Lucius shook his head, stepping inside and shutting the door behind him. "I wish it could. But it's big, Bob. Real big. There's something going down at the downtown mall. Some guy calling himself Black Kringle. He's taken over the whole place." Bob's face hardened. "Taken over? What do you mean?" Lucius sighed, rubbing his hands together to warm them. "I got a call from one of my contacts at the police department. Black Kringle's got a bunch of thugs with him, and he's holding the entire mall hostage. There are bombs, Bob. He's rigged the place to blow if anyone tries to stop him." The mood in the room shifted immediately. Helen's playful smile vanished, replaced with concern. Violet and Dash stopped what they were doing, their eyes wide with worry. Bob's jaw clenched. "Where are the police?" "They've got them all surrounded, but they're not going in," Lucius explained. "Too risky with all the explosives. But there's more. He's taken hostages. Dozens of families trapped inside, including..." Lucius hesitated, his voice dropping. "Including your family, Bob. I saw them." Bob froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. "What do you mean?" Lucius nodded grimly. "I saw Helen, Violet, Dash, and Jack Jack inside. I don't know how they got there, but Black Kringle's got them, Bob. They're being held hostage." Bob's world tilted on its axis. The sense of dread that had settled in his chest was unbearable. His family, the most important people in his life, were in danger, and he wasn't there to protect them. He had always sworn to keep them safe, no matter the cost, and now they were at the mercy of a madman. "I'm going in," Bob growled, his voice low and determined. "There's no way I'm sitting here while they're in danger." Lucius placed a hand on Bob's shoulder, trying to calm him. I figured you'd say that, but we've got to be smart about this, Bob. We don't know what we're dealing with. This guy, Black Kringle, he's dangerous. The place is wired with bombs. One wrong move and the whole mall could come down. Bob's hands clenched into fists. His mind was racing, but he knew Lucius was right. This couldn't be a reckless operation. They had to handle it carefully, or the consequences would be catastrophic. Still, the thought of his family being trapped, terrified in the hands of a lunatic, was unbearable. I'm not letting them down, Bob muttered, already moving toward the door. I'll do whatever it takes. Lucius followed him out, his expression serious. We'll do this together, Bob. We can't afford any mistakes. As they stepped outside into the cold night, Bob could already feel the shift in his mindset. This wasn't just another mission. This wasn't about saving the city or fighting a random villain. By the time Bob and Lucius arrived at the downtown mall, the scene was already chaotic. Police cars formed a perimeter around the massive shopping center, their flashing lights illuminating the snow-covered streets. Officers huddled behind barricades, their radios crackling with reports from inside the building, but none of them dared to enter. The mall itself was eerily silent. The usual holiday cheer had been replaced with a palpable sense of dread. Christmas decorations still adorned the exterior, twinkling lights and festive wreaths, but the joyous atmosphere was gone, overshadowed by the terror happening inside. Bob and Lucius made their way to the police command center, where the chief of police was overseeing the situation. The tension in the air was thick as the officers worked to assess the threat, but the sight of Mr. Incredible and Frozone gave them a glimmer of hope. Chief, Bob said, stepping forward, what's the situation? The chief, a grizzled older man with a stern expression, looked up from his radio. Glad you're here, Incredible. We've got a real mess on our hands. The guy inside, this Black Kringle, he's got the place rigged with bombs. Hostages too. We've been trying to negotiate, but he's not interested. He's just toying with us. Bob's fist clenched. What does he want? The chief shook his head. That's the thing. He's not making any demands. He's just watching. We think he's waiting for something. Maybe for us to slip up. Bob glanced at Lucius, the two exchanging a knowing look. This wasn't just some petty criminal looking for a payout. This was something darker. We need to get inside, Bob said, his voice firm. My family's in there. The chief hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right, we'll give you access to the security cameras, but be careful. One wrong move and he'll set off those bombs. He's got the place wired top to bottom. Bob's heart pounded as he and Lucius prepared to enter the mall. This was it, the moment of truth. His family was inside, and he had no idea what kind of danger they were in. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to leave them in the hands of a madman. As they approached the entrance, the doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the dark, cavernous interior of the mall. The air inside was cold, the festive decorations contrasting sharply with the ominous atmosphere. Somewhere in the shadows, Black Kringle was waiting. Bob clenched his fists, his mind focused on one thing, saving his family. And he would do whatever it took. The mall was eerily quiet as Bob and Lucius stepped inside, the automatic doors hissing shut behind them, the festive decorations, tinsel hanging from the ceiling, garlands wrapped around columns, and giant candy canes placed strategically around the atrium felt like a mockery of the danger they faced. The soft hum of Christmas music played over the mall's speakers, a sickeningly sweet tune that felt wrong in the cold, oppressive atmosphere. Frozone glanced around, his breath visible in the chilly air. We've got to stay sharp, Bob. This whole place is wired to blow. One wrong move, and... Yeah, I know, Bob said, his voice tight. His eyes scanned the shadows for any sign of his family. His heart was pounding, the urgency growing with each step they took. Somewhere in this labyrinth of holiday cheer turned nightmare, Helen, Violet, Dash, and Jack were being held captive by a maniac dressed as Santa Claus. The thought made his blood boil. They moved cautiously through the main atrium, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The police had given them access to the security feeds, but Black Kringle had disabled most of the cameras, leaving them blind to his exact location. Bob's fist clenched, every fiber of his being screaming for him to charge ahead, to rip the place apart until he found his family. But Lucius was right. They couldn't afford to be reckless. The entire mall was a trap, and Black Kringle was waiting for them to make a mistake. As they moved deeper into the mall, Bob's comm crackled to life, the voice of the chief of police cutting through the silence. Mr. Incredible, we're picking up movement on the upper floors, near the food court. We think that's where Black Kringle is holed up. Copy that, Bob replied, his jaw tight. He turned to Lucius. We go up. But as they made their way toward the escalators, something caught Bob's eye. Movement. He stopped, his muscles tensing as he spotted a group of Black Kringle's thugs. Men dressed in dark, twisted versions of elf costumes, armed with rifles and batons. They were patrolling the area, their eyes scanning for any sign of intruders. There, Bob whispered to Lucius, nodding toward the group. We've got company. Lucius grinned, his hands already beginning to glow with icy energy. I've got this. In a flash, Frozone leapt into action, skating across the smooth floor on a trail of ice. Before the thugs could react, he sent a wave of freezing cold toward them, encasing their feet in blocks of ice. The men cried out in shock, fumbling with their weapons as they were immobilized. Bob wasted no time. He charged forward, his fists slamming into the thugs with bone-crushing force. They didn't stand a chance. One by one, they fell to the ground, their weapons clattering uselessly beside them. It was over in seconds. Nice work, Lucius said, lowering his hands. But this is just the welcoming party. Black Kringle's probably got more of them inside. Bob nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. Let's move. As they ascended to the second floor, Bob's mind raced. Where were they keeping Helen, Violet, Dash? His heart ached with every step. He couldn't let himself think about the worst, about what Black Kringle might have already done. He had to stay focused. His family needed him. But just as they reached the top of the escalator, the air shifted. A loud, booming voice echoed through the mall, dripping with malice. Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas, Mr. Incredible! The voice was Black Kringle. It came from all around them, bouncing off the walls, making it impossible to pinpoint its source. I hope you're enjoying the festivities. I've got a little surprise for you. Think of it as an early Christmas present. Bob's gut twisted. Something was wrong. Suddenly, the lights in the mall flickered and died, plunging the building into darkness. The only illumination came from the twinkling Christmas lights, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The festive decorations, once cheerful, now seemed ominous and foreboding. Bob's eyes darted around, trying to adjust to the darkness. Lucius, stay close. I'm here, Frozone said, his voice tense. And then without warning, the floor beneath them exploded. Bob and Lucius were thrown backward, crashing into the walls as the ground shattered, sending debris flying in all directions. A series of secondary explosions followed, each one tearing through the mall's support beams, shaking the entire building. Bob groaned as he pulled himself to his feet, his ears ringing from the blast. What the hell? It's a trap, Lucius muttered, wiping dust from his face. He rigged the whole place. Before they could recover, a new threat emerged. More of Black Kringle's thugs, armed with advanced weapons, swarmed the second floor. These weren't the low-level goons from earlier. These men were heavily armed and trained, their faces hidden behind dark masks. "Looks like we're in for a real fight," Lucius muttered, summoning ice to his hands. Bob's eyes blazed with determination. "We don't have time for this. My family is in here." "Then we'd better take them down fast," Lucius replied, blasting a wave of ice at the approaching thugs. The battle erupted with furious intensity. Bob charged forward, his fists colliding with the thugs like a wrecking ball. Each punch sent shockwaves through the air, his strength unmatched. But these thugs were tougher than they looked. They fought back with precision, using advanced tech and explosives to keep Bob and Lucius on the defensive. Lucius dodged a barrage of bullets, skating across the floor with ease as he unleashed freezing blasts on the thugs. But for everyone they took down, more seemed to take their place. In the midst of the chaos, Bob caught sight of something. Helen. She was tied to a support beam near the far end of the food court, her arms bound behind her back, her face pale and bruised, but she was alive. "Helen!" Bob roared, his voice filled with desperation. Helen's eyes snapped open, and when she saw Bob, a flicker of hope appeared in her gaze. But there was no time to celebrate. Black Kringle's men were still everywhere. "We need to get to her," Lucius shouted over the din of the battle. But these guys aren't letting up. Bob's mind raced. He needed to end this quickly, or there wouldn't be time to save Helen, and there was no telling where the kids were. Suddenly, the loudspeakers crackled to life again, and Black Kringle's voice boomed through the mall once more. "Do you really think you can stop me, Mr. Incredible? The clock is ticking, and if you don't hurry, Christmas will be over. For everyone." Bob's hands clenched into fists. "I'm coming for you, Kringle. And when I find you, you're going to wish you never messed with my family." He turned to Lucius, his voice grim. "I'll take care of these guys. You get Helen." Lucius nodded, skating toward Helen as Bob launched himself back into the fight. His fists were a blur as he tore through the remaining thugs, each blow fueled by the fire of his determination. But no matter how many he knocked down, more kept coming. The mall was rigged with explosives. Black Kringle had set a trap not just for Bob and Lucius, but for everyone inside. The realization hit Bob like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about holding hostages. Kringle wanted to take the whole mall down. And if Bob didn't stop him, he would. As Lucius reached Helen and began untying her, Bob felt a shift in the air. He glanced around, his eyes narrowing as he spotted something hidden among the decorations. Barely visible beneath the holiday lights. A bomb. Bob's blood ran cold. It wasn't just one bomb, it was dozens, placed all around the support beams and structural points of the mall, and the timer was ticking down. He had to stop them, but where were Violet, Dash, and Jack-Jack? "Lucius," Bob called, his voice urgent. "We've got bombs. We need to find the kids and get everyone out now." Lucius looked up from where he was untying Helen, his face pale. "You sure?" Bob nodded grimly. "I'm sure." They didn't have much time. Black Kringle's plan was in motion, and if they didn't act fast, the entire mall and everyone inside would be gone. The ticking of the bombs echoed in Bob's mind, each second hammering home the urgency of the situation. His family was trapped, the mall rigged to explode, and Black Kringle was out there somewhere watching it all unfold. Bob clenched his fists, the pressure building in his chest. This was supposed to be a peaceful Christmas, a time for family, not this nightmare. But he couldn't afford to dwell on what could have been. There was no time. "Lucius, get Helen out of here," Bob shouted as he tore through the last of the thugs. His fists moved with brutal precision, each punch landing with enough force to knock the armed men to the ground. But no matter how many he took down, the real threat was still looming: the bombs. "Bob," Helen called, her voice weak but filled with urgency. "Where are the kids? Have you seen them?" Bob's heart pounded in his chest. "I don't know, but I'm going to find them." Lucius helped Helen to her feet, but as they moved toward the exit, something shifted in the air. A loud, menacing laugh echoed through the mall, bouncing off the walls in a way that made Bob's skin crawl. "Leaving so soon?" Black Kringle's voice boomed from above. The villain appeared on a balcony overlooking the chaos below, his dark Santa suit glistening in the glow of the Christmas lights. His face was twisted into a cruel smile, his eyes gleaming with malicious glee. "I thought you'd stay for the grand finale." Bob's fist clenched as he turned to face Black Kringle. "Where are my kids?" Black Kringle's grin widened. "Oh, they're around. Don't worry, they'll be here for the show." Bob's heart raced. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to stop Kringle now. With a roar, Bob charged at the villain, his powerful legs launching him into the air as he leapt toward the balcony. But Black Kringle was ready. With a flick of his wrist, he activated a device hidden in his coat, and suddenly, the entire mall shook as the countdown on the bomb sped up. "You really thought you could save Christmas," Black Kringle sneered. "I'm going to bury this holiday once and for all." Bob's mind raced as he reached the balcony, his massive fist swinging at Black Kringle. The villain dodged with surprising agility, slipping out of Bob's reach. The two engaged in a fierce battle, their blows echoing through the empty corridors of the mall. Bob's strength was unmatched, but Black Kringle fought with the cunning of someone who had planned every step of this twisted game. "You think you're the hero, Mr. Incredible?" Black Kringle hissed, dodging another punch. "But you're just a pawn in a game you don't even understand." But Bob wasn't listening. His focus was on one thing: saving his family. As the fight raged on, Helen, her strength slowly returning, tapped into her own power. Using her elasticity, she stretched up to the balcony and joined the fight. Together, she and Bob cornered Black Kringle, forcing him to the edge. "Give it up, Kringle," Helen growled. "It's over." But Black Kringle's grin never faltered. He reached into his coat once more, pulling out a small detonator. "You may have won this fight, but you'll never stop what's coming." Before he could press the button, a blast of freezing cold air shot across the balcony, encasing Black Kringle's hand in ice. He looked down in shock, realizing too late that Frozone had joined the fight, his hands glowing with icy energy. "Looks like you've been iced," Lucius quipped, skating onto the balcony. With Black Kringle immobilized, Bob and Helen finally had the upper hand. Bob grabbed the detonator from the villain's frozen hand, crushing it in his fist. The bombs were deactivated. The city and Christmas were saved. With the immediate threat neutralized, Bob's heart still raced. He hadn't seen Violet, Dash, or Jack yet, and the worry gnawed at him. The mall, though still standing, was littered with debris from the explosions, and the damage made it look like a war zone. Just as Bob was about to lose hope, he heard a familiar voice, small but strong. "Dad." He turned, and there they were. Violet, Dash, and Jack emerging from a hiding spot behind a collapsed display of toys. His heart leaped with relief as he ran toward them, gathering all three into his arms, holding them tightly. "I thought I'd lost you," Bob whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're okay, Dad," Violet said, her voice trembling slightly. "We hid when things got crazy." Dash grinned, clearly trying to lighten the mood. "I mean, It's not every day you get to hide out in a toy store during an evil Santa's attack. Helen joined them, wrapping her arms around the kids. The Parr family was together again, and for a moment, the world felt right. The police arrived shortly after, taking Black Kringle and his thugs into custody. The bombs were all deactivated and the hostages were safely evacuated. The mall, while damaged, was still standing, and thanks to the Incredibles and Frozone, the city was safe once more. By the time the Parr family returned home, it was late on Christmas Eve. Snow continued to fall softly outside, blanketing the world in a peaceful, quiet white. Inside their cozy home, the Christmas tree lights twinkled, casting a warm glow over the living room. Bob sat in his favorite chair watching as Violet and Dash set out cookies and milk for Santa. Jack in his pajamas was already fast asleep in Helen's arms. For the first time since the nightmare at the mall began, Bob felt at peace. His family was safe, Christmas was saved, and all was right in the world. "Looks like we saved Christmas," Helen said with a tired smile as she sat down next to Bob. Bob grinned, his heart full. "Yeah, we really did." As the family settled in for the night, there was a knock at the door. Bob frowned, exchanging a curious glance with Helen before standing up to answer it. When he opened the door, no one was there, but on the doorstep sat a small, neatly wrapped present. Bob picked it up, puzzled, and brought it inside. Attached to the gift was a note, written in elegant, flowing script. "Thank you, Mr. Incredible. Christmas wouldn't have been the same without you. But be ready. Christmas might need your help again sooner than you think. Best wishes, Santa." Bob chuckled as he read the note, shaking his head. "Looks like we're on Santa's nice list." Helen smiled as she looked at the note. "I guess saving Christmas has its perks." As the clock struck midnight, signaling the start of Christmas Day, Bob sat back in his chair. His family gathered around him. The world was quiet, peaceful, and full of hope. And somewhere out there, Santa Claus was preparing for the next adventure.